Hey, I'm Dr. Wolfe, veterinarian and food therapist for pets, and today I'm going to share with you a recipe for dogs with itchy skin. While most dogs with itchy skin are often reacting to environmental allergens, diet still plays a crucial role in reducing inflammation, protecting and maintaining the skin barrier, and nourishing the microbiome. We cannot neglect the importance of gut health when it comes to maintaining skin health. There's actually something called the gut-skin axis, which is the connection between your pet's gut health and their skin health. When the gut is out of balance from things like stress, poor diet, or even antibiotics, this can result in inflammation that compromises the skin barrier and causes itchy skin and rashes. And 70% of your pet's immune system actually lives in their gut. So by supporting a healthy microbiome, we're actually supporting a healthy immune system and a more regulated response to allergens. Now, it's important to be aware that a smaller percentage of dogs are going to have food allergies or intolerances. And oftentimes this is to the protein in the diet, not the carbohydrates or grains. Now, if your pet is suspected to have a food intolerance, they will need to undergo an elimination diet trial, and I've listed out the protocol in the description below. They will also need to be fed a novel protein, meaning one they haven't been exposed to before. While the recipe I'm sharing in this video doesn't contain poultry, which is one of the more common food allergens, it is not meant to be used as an elimination diet. If that's something you need help with, you can work with me inside of a one-on-one consult, and I've linked how to do that in the description. Now let's get started cooking. So this recipe calls for 93% lean ground beef liver, spinach, red bell pepper, sardines, nutritional yeast, hemp seeds, and sweet potato. And to help fill in nutritional deficiencies, we're also going to need seaweed calcium, kelp for iodine, zinc, wheat germ oil, and cod liver oil. Now, it's really important to understand that you cannot swap out or omit any of these ingredients, otherwise you're going to completely unbalance the recipe. If you do want to build meals like this but need to swap out or omit an ingredient, check out the description where I've linked my homemade diet mini course. It takes you less than 2 hours to complete and walks you step by step through the process of building customized recipes for your pet that work for both your pet's needs and your budget. So check that out in the description. Now, anytime you're cooking meat for your pet, you do want to make sure it's cooked to a safe internal temperature, just like you and I would eat it. Contrary to some of the myths that you may have heard online, dogs can get foodborne illness, things like Salmonella, E. coli, and parasites. So we do want to make sure it's fully cooked to prevent that. And also be sure you're using the right cut of beef. If you do happen to go for something like 85% lean, you're going to increase the fat content significantly and decrease the protein content significantly. You might also cause a deficiency in certain nutrients like zinc, so be sure to stick to the recipe exactly. And the same thing goes for the beef liver. What I do is boil some water, put the beef liver in, and then simmer until thoroughly cooked. Look at these guys coming over to taste test. Always got to have the taste testers over here to approve of the recipe. It's so funny because my dog absolutely will not eat chicken liver, but she loves beef liver for some reason, so taste test approved. So I've got everything cooked and pre-measured for this recipe, and an absolute non-negotiable when you're cooking for pets is a food scale. I suggest weighing everything in grams. It's going to be a lot more accurate. If you're measuring something in cups, the amount can vary based on how you chop up that ingredient. So grams is going to keep everything really accurate, and that's super important for homemade pet food because if you do measure something wrong or if you swap out or omit an ingredient, it's going to completely throw off the balance of that recipe, and you could end up causing some nutrient deficiencies. So in addition to all my ingredients, I also have my recipe handy on my laptop. You can either print yours out or keep your laptop nearby and make sure that you're following everything exactly. You're also going to want a food processor. This is going to be your best friend. Instead of having to chop everything up really finely, this is going to blend up everything for you. It also helps with preventing your pet from picking out certain ingredients. Like if they don't like the spinach or other vegetables that are in the diet, it will help to blend them up and mask the flavor. Now, there's a couple of ways you can add the food to the processor. You can either have like a giant mixing bowl. This is going to work better probably for smaller dogs, but take a giant mixing bowl, throw the entire recipe into the bowl, mix it up, and then start blending it up in batches. But the way that I like to do it is by measuring out 2 to 3 days worth of food for each ingredient, adding that to the food processor, transferring it to a glass storage container, and then moving on to the next batch. It's really up to you which way you do it, but just make sure everything is blended evenly and that you're feeding the right amount in ounces or grams to your pet. I'm using beef for this recipe because it is rich in zinc, which is really important for skin health. But as you'll see, I do still supplement this recipe with additional zinc. We want it to be at a certain level in the recipe for it to be therapeutic. But like with most nutrients, you can definitely overdo the zinc level. So again, super important to follow the recipe exactly. I like sweet potatoes as a carbohydrate because they are rich in prebiotic fibers. Remember, we want to feed that microbiome and nourish the gut. But I feel like it's really common to hear this myth that carbohydrates, especially things like sweet potatoes, will actually cause yeast infections. And typically that's not going to actually be the case. Like I mentioned before, with skin allergies, the skin barrier is often disrupted, and this can allow for secondary pathogens like bacteria that shouldn't be there and yeast to overgrow out of control. So simply eliminating carbs from the diet is unlikely to fix the issue. We have to actually get to the root cause, which is reducing inflammation and restoring the gut microbiome. I also get asked a lot if recipes can be made without using organ meats because they are a bit smelly and some people get grossed out by cooking them. And I totally get that because beef liver is super smelly. It is possible to make homemade pet food without organs. You definitely can do that. But the reason I like to use them is because beef liver in particular is one of the most nutrient dense ingredients we can possibly find. So it's really going to help to enrich the diet, and it will lessen the amount of synthetic vitamins and minerals that we need to add in. However, because it is so nutrient dense, we can also overdo it, especially when it comes to copper levels, because it is super rich in copper. And I might sound like a broken record here, but this is again showing the importance of using a balanced recipe. If we're just kind of throwing in ingredients haphazardly, we could very easily cause something like a copper toxicity. So really important to use that recipe. I also almost always include at least 1 to 2 vegetables in the recipe, and this is especially important for pets with skin allergies because these are the primary source of antioxidants, things like vitamin C, that are really going to help to boost your pet's immune system. And again, they're going to supply those prebiotic fibers, which are really important for feeding the good bacteria in the gut. Another really important nutrient for skin health is omega-3 fatty acids. The recipe needs to have an anti-inflammatory omega fatty acid ratio, meaning we want to have more omega-3s than omega-6s. A lot of commercial diets on the market, even fresh food ones, have a really high omega-6 to 3 ratio, meaning they're going to lean more pro-inflammatory. But we don't want to add too many omega-3s because yes, you can actually overdose your pet. And both sardines and cod liver oil are really rich in vitamin D, so overdoing this can also result in a vitamin D toxicity. So yet again, this is the reason it's so important to use a balanced recipe. I am adding the sardines directly into the recipe, but for fish oil, I do suggest adding it in per meal. So if your pet needs 1 capsule a day, you just add it on top of the meal. You can even cut it open and pour it onto the food. What I don't recommend to do, especially if you're using a liquid fish oil, is just dumping it directly into the recipe, because the longer it's exposed to light and air, the faster it's going to oxidize and go rancid. So I just like to keep it fresh and add it right on top of the meal. I'm also adding nutritional yeast to this recipe to help boost the vitamin B content, and hemp seeds to boost the linoleic acid content in the diet, which is also really important for skin health. Now, even though this recipe might seem complete and balanced as is, it actually isn't. It's still deficient in calcium, vitamin E, and iodine, and the zinc content is on the lower end. Like I mentioned before, we want the zinc to be at a therapeutic level for skin health, so I am going to be supplementing a little bit of zinc in this recipe. I'm going to be using seaweed calcium for this recipe. You could also use eggshell powder, but like I mentioned before, you can't just swap out ingredients without reformulating the recipe. So if you want to learn how to do that, be sure to check out my mini course. For iodine, some people will use iodized salt, and in some recipes I do that as long as the sodium content doesn't go too high. For this recipe in particular, I'm going to be using kelp for my iodine source. And this is another one that's really important to not overdo it, because you can give your pet too much iodine and that's going to mess with their thyroid. For the zinc, I have capsules, so all I do is just open that and put the powder on top of everything. And like I mentioned before, I'm just going to be adding the cod liver oil right on top of her meal. And I'm going to also do the same thing with the wheat germ oil. And the reason I'm using this is because it's a really rich source of vitamin E, which is another powerful antioxidant, really important for skin health. So since I'm adding those to the meals, I've got everything in my food processor and we can get it blended. Now, I've said it before, but I'll say it again for anybody that's new here. I never store my pet's food or my food in plastic Tupperware. I try to avoid microplastics as much as possible. So I use these glass storage containers, and I've linked the ones I use in the description below. But if you do have a larger breed dog, these are gonna take up quite a bit of space, especially if you're batch prepping the food. So sometimes we have to get a little bit creative and end up using, alternative options, but I find these work really, really well for small dogs especially. Depending on what ingredients you use in a recipe, sometimes it will turn out a bit dry. I find that does happen kind of often with beef liver. So usually what I do is, like with each meal, I'll just add a little bit of water to kind of moisten it into almost like a pate. You don't necessarily have to, that's just something that I do for my dog. Well, that's it. We are prepped and ready to serve this super nutrient-dense, anti-inflammatory, skin and gut supportive recipe for dogs. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up below and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future recipe tutorials. See you next time.